and sanity as far as possible in a world that's going crazy. The question of liberty looms large in the end of time. Will the United States still be letting freedom ring? Now, we've looked at some of the nations mentioned in the Holy Bible, and we have seen already the rise and fall of nations. You know, we go back to Daniel chapter 2, and way back then, God spoke to us about Babylon. Now, Babylon was important, and God spoke about Babylon. This is where God's covenant people, the nation of Israel, were taken captive down there to Babylon. Babylon was profoundly influential. God's people were taken down there. He allowed it to happen so that they might learn some sense. They were taken to Babylon as a result of their intransigence, as a result of their sin. And God allowed that to happen so that down there their idolatry and their wandering and their sinfulness might be healed. Then Medo-Persia came along and conquered Babylon. Medo-Persia was profoundly influential as well. It was the Medo-Persian king who gave permission for the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the city and the temple, and reestablish Jewish society. Very, very important. And then along came Greece and ruled the world, and then came Rome. And Rome was ruling when Jesus was alive on the earth. Jesus was nailed to a Roman instrument of torture, the cross, you understand. And then the book of Daniel said that Rome would eventually divide. It would not be conquered by another great nation, but it would divide. And out of the Roman Empire would come 10 nations, including a small nation that the Bible calls the little horn. Now, Bible commentators believe that this little horn is the same power as spoken about in Revelation chapter 13. Here's what it says in the Bible in Revelation 13:1. This is the little horn, but with a little extra information. I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads the name of blasphemy. The beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it had been mortally wounded. His deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. Verse 4 says, so they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? This is this first beast. Some people refer to it as the Antichrist. This is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13, same as the little horn in Daniel 7. We will identify that in just a few days very clearly. But then along comes another nation. Revelation 13 verse 11 says, I beheld another beast, and in prophecy a beast represents a kingdom or a nation. I beheld another beast coming up out of the what? Out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. Now let's see if we can look into the Bible and, using biblical principles of interpretation, understand who this second beast in Revelation 13 might be. Where does it come from? It comes up out of the earth. Now in the Bible and Bible prophecy, the sea is used as a symbol to represent multitudes of people. You read that in Revelation 17 verses 1 and 15, and the symbol is used in other places in the Bible. The sea represents multitudes of people. By contrast, here the Bible is talking about the earth. We could probably then take this to mean not a densely populated area, but a sparsely populated area, a relatively uninhabited area. And then when did it arise? It must have been relatively recently, because it was after those 4 kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then Rome, would divide into 10 nations, many of them the nations of modern Europe that we see today. And then after those nations are set up, Daniel 7:25 says, then the little horn comes. So it must be in some way a new nation, a young nation. It's got to be new or young. And then the Bible tells us a little bit more about how it came up. Notice, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb. That's fascinating. In the New Testament, virtually every time, well, let me be more specific. In the book of Revelation, every time that word lamb is used, it's speaking about Jesus Christ. Except for this time. In Revelation, the lamb is Jesus, except for this time. But this time it says, this thing is lamb-like. So perhaps we can understand here that in some way, this nation is going to be Christ-like. Somehow it's going to adhere to Christ-like principles. And something we notice is not there. There's no crown. Now, the first beast, on his head, he had all of these crowns. This second nation, on its head, there was no crown, indicating if there's no crown, therefore there's no monarchy. This thing stands for freedom. So, recap, here's what we know. It arose in a sparsely populated area of the world. It's a young nation. There is no monarchy. We might then assume that it is a republic. And it assumes a position of worldwide influence. You know, there's only one nation in the world that can fit that description. And that is the United States of America. When it arose, it was known as the New World. It was a haven for those who were fleeing religious persecution. It was founded on the freedom of religion and government. But according to the Bible, this nation would experience a change in its heart. How do we know that? We'll look at Revelation 13, verse 11 again. Notice what it says. I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, another nation. Understand, to call something a beast in Bible prophecy is not an insult. That's just saying it's a nation or a kingdom. I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, and he then spoke as a what? Spoke as a dragon. In Revelation, the dragon represents who? Satan. Somehow, this nation, so Christ-like, somehow this nation that stands for freedom, somehow, the Bible says it will eventually speak as a dragon. And how is it that a nation speaks? A nation speaks through its laws. That's how a nation speaks. President can say what he wants. That's his opinion. But if you want to know where the nation is on something, you look at the nation's laws. So it would suggest here in the book of Revelation, this nation that is so Christ-like, this nation that stands for principles that God cherishes, will experience such a change in its heart that the Bible could say that one day this nation would speak as a dragon. Evidently, there will be something that takes place of a legal nature, something happening in the legislative assembly that's going to demonstrate a significant change has taken place in the heart of this nation. Now, I want you to notice what it says in Revelation 13 and verse 12. Revelation 13, verse 12, speaking of the second nation. The Bible says he exercises all the power of the first beast or nation that was before him. And he causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Isn't that something? I want you to see that word with me. He causes the earth and them which dwell therein. This buttresses the point we made just a moment ago. How does well, you tell me, another word for causes. He caused something. Give me another word for that. Did I hear something? What did you say again? Forces. That's perfect. Doesn't get better than that. He causes. He forces. He coerces. For a nation to cause people to change their behavior. For a nation to force, you know what nations do. If they want you to go slow out on the road, they change the speed limit. If they don't want you to carry something across state lines, they make a law against it. There will be laws passed, evidently, that will cause the world to worship this first beast. According to the Bible, the second nation in Revelation chapter 13 will use its power and influence to cause everybody in the earth to follow the first beast, that first beast of Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 13. Can you imagine how that could happen? Frankly, I think you can imagine how that could happen. But what we want to do is try to understand how that might actually come about. You know, with freedom comes responsibility. When freedom is given, you take a great risk. I have a son who is not quite 12 years old. He doesn't know it yet, so please don't tell him, but he will never be allowed to drive my car. I don't mind that you think I'm kidding. Any other parents ever felt that same way? If I give the car keys to my kid, I'm taking a great... When my father gave my next oldest brother the keys to the car, he took a humongous risk. In fact, the funny thing was, sometimes my brother would take the car without Dad even knowing. That was fine until he crashed it into a bank and messed up the radiator. And Dad's out there putting water into the radiator. It's coming out the bottom faster than it's going into the top. He turns to my brother and he says, "Have you been driving this car?" You know he didn't own up. See, when we give the keys of the car to our children, we take a risk. Now, hopefully our children are responsible by then, and I'm sure that by the time my son is 29 years old, I'll change my mind and I'll let him drive the car, I'm sure. But you see, with freedom, there comes responsibility. And when you extend freedom to somebody, you take a risk. What if he drives dangerously? What if he wrecks? What if somebody hits him? There's a risk. In this country, you are allowed to go and learn how to fly a plane. You're allowed to do that. But when we allow you to fly a plane, we take a risk. What happens if you are a nut and you choose to fly that plane into a skyscraper? See? We take a risk. And what often happens is this. You're allowed to do something until somebody comes along and messes it up for everybody by showing that they're irresponsible. And so now you cannot... The vast majority of people who fly in airplanes aren't going to do anybody any harm. But now that we know somebody has and somebody might, you've got to run the gauntlet just to get through security. And they're patting you down and they're putting their hands inside the band of your pants and they're taking photographs of you that you hope nobody will ever see. It's a reaction against what happened when somebody abused their freedom, you see. With freedom, there comes risk. And when people use their freedom in an irresponsible way, then the government needs to press back in an attempt to what they think they're doing to protect everybody. Now, what's happened in the United States of America? Let's think. This place was once a refuge for people who wanted to come from all parts of the globe so that they could worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience. Today, it doesn't look that way anymore. The United States is now a paradise for people who want to flaunt their atheism or their godlessness. And they appeal to the same constitution that allowed people the freedom to worship to rail against that worship and act as though there's no God. Now, I'm not saying we ought to change that law. Thank the Lord, you are free to worship and free not to worship. But in the beginning, the religious freedom was designed so that people could come here and worship God freely. And that freedom has been taken and it's really been corrupted. Society has become so corrupted by immorality that these days appalling behavior is rewarded. If you become infamous for having done something really bad, you're going to end up with a contract. You're going to end up as the spokesperson for somebody. There's someone wants to make a television program out of you, and whereas once upon a time you would have hung your head in shame and skulked back to a corner, now you become famous and it's your ticket to stardom. I'm not going to mention individual cases, but if you would just think about some of the stars or starlets and ask what it was that made them famous in the first place. A generation ago, they would never have dared show their face again. You see, wickedness is rewarded by celebrity. And these days, it seems like there is little or no real moral restraint. We're living in an anything-goes society. You can hardly shock anybody anymore. and the things that once upon a time we would have